Hello everybody, welcome to this morning's stream. I'm going to kick it off now just because of the fact that at 11 o'clock I think there's some sort of moment of silence for key workers and things like that, at least in the UK. My wife told me about it this morning, so I just want to make sure that people can get to that if that's something that they want to participate in. So today's stream is about social learning, and we've covered a lot of topics that kind of touch on this over the last week, 2 weeks, well actually 3 weeks now, in our third week of streaming. For me, I wanted to start off about, what is social learning? And for me, social learning is not about the Facebook equivalent in the business world. To me, social learning is more all-encompassing than that. It is the act of people sharing best practice, feeling like they're contributing to part of a community, being involved in that community, and getting something from it themselves, not just always the contribution side of things. So for me, it is about making learning part of the social makeup of an organization. And that means that there's more than one thing you have to do, more than one type of medium you have to use. And it's not just a case of saying we've turned on chat functionality and away you go. Now you are learning socially. Very, very different. So I've got a couple of images I'm going to share and talk to today that touch on some statistics around social learning or social use of social platforms. I think should translate to the L&D space, but also about how I would pull together multiple points to actually create a social experience. And this is not a roadmap by any stretch of the imagination. What this is to show that there are multiple ways to do something, and that the avenues that you take or the routes that you take to your audience should be based upon the research that you do, and they're not. It's not something you can pick up from one organization and take to another, because the makeup of your social structure of your company is very different. The hierarchy might be different. You might be a very flat organization. You may have clear lines of reporting responsibility, and therefore a more traditional makeup of an organization. So those kind of things and other external influences put barriers or challenges in place that make social link sometimes difficult. But it doesn't mean it's not possible. And sometimes these tools can be used to break down those barriers. So let me show you an image first of all. Let me just tee it up here. So I'm thinking that the best place to start is to actually talk about probably the appetite. Let's go the appetite for social learning, because I think it helps to understand that in the context of the real world. How much do people use social media themselves? So let me pull up a couple of things that are quite interesting. Bear with me 2 seconds. Just loading it into the system. So let's talk about something that everyone is using right now, and that is Teams and Slack, for that matter. So Teams and Slack. So hopefully the image on screen you can see there. Hopefully it's big enough. You can see what this data is showing us here is that we are looking at the daily active user count of Slack and Teams, dating back to 2014 when Slack was released. Up to November last year was the last data point collected in this survey from Statista. And actually, this website Statista has a huge number of links associated with Teams and Slack and other mediums that might be of interest. Obviously, there's a couple of interesting points, and one is the very, very rapid growth of Teams. Obviously launched 2 years later than Slack, but has accelerated at a rate of knots. I think largely, and there will be multiple factors, but due in part to the fact it's a Microsoft product. The name is known, it gets bundled into a lot of offerings, and it gets talked about and advertised. It's Microsoft. Understandably, the rate at which it can penetrate a market is much greater than something like a Slack that came as a relatively unknown and has taken five or so years to actually grow. However, what's really, really interesting is that, if you take the data point even back in September time, we're looking at somewhere in the region of about 12 to 13 million users on either platform using each day. And let's not forget, these are business tools. Now, why do I reference these tools? Because they're not learning tools at all. What they are is tools by which people collaborate and communicate and have a more social engagement than they did do prior to this, using things such as email. I appreciate instant messaging, things like that existed within businesses and was used to varying degrees, but Slack and Teams have really taken that and added in things like document sharing and some degree of conference calling capability, multiple thread channels and user groups and private channels, and all this kind of stuff that actually emulates a lot of behavior that takes place on other applications like Facebook and WhatsApp, even forums, for example. So what Teams and Slack show us is that actually people are willing to use these platforms. Now, I appreciate that, if a business goes through an initiative of instigating a Teams or a Slack and is the preferred medium for communication, I get that that's going to have a bearing on the numbers. But, I'm sure you can appreciate in your own businesses, just because you implement a piece of technology doesn't mean people use it day one. Email has been around for donkey's years, and to shift people from using a medium like email that they've been used to using, know it in and out, to something brand new, show and in such a short space of time shows the appetite to collaborate in a more fluid and dynamic way. Just thought I'd post that up there. Really interesting. What would be really even more interesting probably is to look at these statistics now, and we don't have the data points for this yet, but in the light of the current crisis, I would only expect this to have gone up. In the way that we know from statistics, you can Google this around the web, but like the use of the top 3 web conferencing softwares, like Zoom, for example, top of the list. House Party is another one. Obviously, that's for more social use, but those kind of tools have been used not just by businesses, but by Joe Public or people in their personal lives. But fundamentally, there has been such a rapid need for these kind of softwares that people are just jumping to use them. So I thought I'd post up there as a really interesting point. Secondary to this is the idea of, let me pull that up for you, is maybe YouTube. So what does YouTube show us? Apologies, it's not loading up. I do have an image there. I promise you that. Okay, YouTube stats. It's like to resize itself. Here we go. So YouTube stats. This is a bit of a different slant, but the one I wanted to really focus on here is YouTube, as we know, is a portal by which we consume video content, whether live like this or pre-recorded. But the reality is that, a lot of people go on this for differing needs. But what's interesting to me is at the top of this graph, we see that people are going to YouTube to figure out how to do things they haven't done before. Now, that's probably not, well, hopefully it's not too much of a surprise. We know video is the most used medium when it comes to digital learning, whether it be personal or in the business world. But what's so interesting here is that even if you factor in the somewhats as well into that category, 86% of people are learning using YouTube. So what that's telling me is, yes, they're consuming video, but it's also interesting that YouTube is the most used video platform on the web, and there are others out there. Vimeo is a good example. But what Vimeo doesn't do, and it does a few things that YouTube doesn't do, but the biggest one to me is it doesn't have the social aspect. The commenting, the ability to subscribe in the way that you can on YouTube, it doesn't exist. YouTube essentially, when you think about it, when you make a subscription to a channel or you engage over a prolonged period, if you don't subscribe, you get notifications, whatever it may be, with a channel or content creator, what you're actually doing is joining their community. You're joining their little world of like-minded people that consume that content on a daily, weekly, or however many times a video is posted basis. And you're doing that because you want to learn more about that topic or potentially be entertained. But given that 86% of people are using it to learn, a lot of the time people are going there, obviously, to find out new things and to further their capabilities. I'm one of those. I am 100% falling into those top 2 categories of just passing the time and finding out how to do things. And probably the top one is my main prerogative. Perfect example, can't go to the gym at the moment. Obviously, it's closed. Needed to build myself some weights equipment for the garage, bench press and stuff like that, stuff to help me because I have no one to train with. And so I went on YouTube, found a solution, found a number of videos on how to build one myself out of wood. I now have a wooden power rack in the garage. You know, it's easy for me to upskill, easy for me to get that information to be able to improve what I'm doing, you know, my life on a daily basis through something like YouTube very rapidly. And the social aspect is important because that social aspect is providing me with a qualification that what I'm looking at is good. The comments, the number of likes a video gets, they're all aspects that are building my opinion of that video and that content. But that wouldn't happen if I didn't have the social aspect wasn't there. And I don't think YouTube would be as good a platform without it. So there's a couple of external things, and I think both of those two areas, the social chats and the sharing of content, show the relevancy of things that exist outside of learning. But what about things that exist inside of learning? So let's take a look at well, video does obviously, but it exists within learning. But let's look at something like blogs, for example, because blogs are one of those things that have been around for literally donkey's years. I can't actually remember a time where a blog didn't exist when the internet existed in the form that it does now. Let me just pull up some of these blog slides here, which I think are hugely interesting. So we're talking about engagement, and this is a statistic I will probably come back to later on this stream. But this is blog traffic across the web. This is survey data taken over a number of years, and the data came from a study that was completed in 2019. So, interesting statistic here is that 75% of blog traffic is generated by older posts. What that tells me is that it doesn't matter if a blog post was created a year ago, it is still potentially relevant to people today. So in learning, I would be looking at this and going, well, if I can integrate blogging and get people to contribute from my workforce, you know, that content might sit on there for 6 months, a year, but it still might be relevant to people. It's still a resource that can be used and to get people engaged, and they can see the past thread of comments that were related to that blog post. It has longevity. It's not just I've made this post, it's relevant this week, and then it's, you know, it's done and dusted. No need for any more. Just an interesting statistic, and one that I wasn't expecting. I thought it would be new content generating this. So, you know, again, learned something myself today. Also, in terms of blog posts, we've also got something along the lines of this, which is 77% of internet users now read blogs, or have at least subscribed to a few of them. Really interesting statistic. 77%. It just shows you how willing people are to engage with other sources of content that exist without their direct sphere of influence, and how readily available that content is, but how willing people are to engage with it. To ignore that in an L&D function where we have hugely talented people in our organizations, it's almost a crime to say we don't capture that or bottle that in some way. Now, I'm not saying to every organization go out and create a blog. It may not be appropriate. What I'm seeking to do is show you the fact that we're talking about 77% of internet users here, of which the vast majority will be made up of the working population. So just think about how much people are willing to go out and source information or subscribe to feeds of information. It's a massive number when you think about it. Okay, so there's a couple of points there on appetite. Probably worth showing an image now, which we've seen before on previous streams, you know, a few last week. And I wanted to focus specifically on probably this top left area. In fact, let me do, apologies if it gets slightly blurry, but I'm going to blow that up. I'm going to make that a bit bigger. Bear with me 2 seconds. Oh. This should scale up momentarily on all your screens. Okay, so just easy to see. So there are multiple modalities there we've defined as social, but as I said, for me, social learning is how you build that community of learning. But let's touch on a couple of these points. Chat functionality we've covered in Teams and things like that. But there are ways to have activity feeds in the content you create. You can have other chat options such as forums. You know, that hugely beneficial, that hold a record of what's the conversation, allow you to link out, allow you to post images, essentially continue discussion. There's opportunities for wikis, there you can have polls. We've already mentioned blogs. There are loads of options here that build a social profile. But there are also other things around this that also help on this graphic. But what about the idea of self-authoring to help build that social culture? And I use the word culture there very deliberately because for me, it is about that culture shift. It is about how, as I said, how do we create an environment by which learners want to give knowledge and acquire knowledge, and they do that habitually or as part of their daily life, because that's the secret to success. It's why YouTube's so popular. It becomes part of your daily routine to log on when you're on your commute, when you've got a spare 5 minutes, before you go to bed, whenever it might be that you do your YouTubing, as many of us do. You know, it's found its way into our personal lives as a habit. And learning probably is never going to get to that level, but what it can do is become a natural space for people to go, do you know what? I don't know the answer to this question, but someone probably does, and they probably know it here. And that here, you'd hope, would be the learning platform that you use. So for me, I would be looking at how do we nurture that social environment? And I think a lot of that can be done via engagement with the population. I've spoken before about self-authoring and about how you include people, but in this area here, in the social modalities area, we've got so many possibilities for including our audience in a way that doesn't require huge technical skill, doesn't require the use of software specific to them or their machine and training on that software, or indeed hardware. What we're saying is, can you share your experiences? So can you share that on a piece of content if there's the ability to post comments? Can you share that in a forum where we might have set up a thread related to a specific topic area? Could you share your learning on a blog post and write about how you did this? The benefits of that are huge. Think about that individual. They've done something great within the business. Let's say they've defined a new process that saves 2 hours when something previously took 8. So they got it down to 6, and you can say you're championing that individual to show how good they are within the business, what they've delivered, what the value that they've brought. That person feels great. They feel engaged. Then you're talking about the people it's going out to. Well, it's going out to their peers who are celebrating that person's success. Great, builds that sense of community, but also means that process is getting out there much quicker than it would have done had you potentially gone about creating a video that you pushed out to your learner population that they may or may not have clicked on, or may not have fully engaged with if it was mandatory. We're talking about something from the source, something meaningful, something that has a sense of what's the word I'm looking for? It has a sense of authenticity about it. That it's sometimes difficult for L&D to manufacture from, their castle on the hill sitting in HQ or wherever they may be. They're not down in the nitty gritty, in the dirty, and in the coal face. So I would be looking at how I blend these. Now, how would I go about doing that? Well, a lot of platforms now include the ability to include social features. The challenge will be how, moving them away from areas where they're already engaging. And I think that the thing for me is, do not move them away from those environments. So let's take the team and the Slack conversation here. It's being used. There's no question about it. Most people tuning into this, if not everybody, will have one of those two platforms or an equivalent in their organization right now. Don't leave it. People are working there, but consider creating specific learning channels. Maybe an all-encompassing one, but maybe learning channels that are specific to an individual, that form part of their feed, and you use those by ways to market new learning content to people. So when you've released a new program in, let's say, an IT process, then that gets pushed out to the people that are already subscribed to that channel on Slack or on Teams. what about using the ability to integrate other options like chatbots? I know that might be technology that's a bit far out there and maybe space age to some people, but there are tools that allow us to connect in the learning system directly into those environments where people can source or search for the content and jump right to it, reducing that barrier between learning platform and the social tool that they're using on a daily, frankly, even, hourly basis. So my biggest thing with social is find a way that molds to that organization. Where are people now currently, and work out ways to leverage that. I can see our good friend Laura Overton is in the chat. This is excellent. By the way, everybody, I should have mentioned this at the start. The chat is live. Please feel free to comment, ask questions, engage. It's how we all gain more from this. But Laura, thank you for joining. More people are now using digital to become social. Agreed. What are the lessons that learning professionals can take away from this? How can we add value back into that environment? Yeah, I think I'm starting to touch on that. But let me just go through that. What are the lessons that learning professionals can take away from this? So the statistics I showed at the start are a really big one. I don't know when you joined, Laura, into the stream. I noticed the viewer count's been going up as we've been talking, or I've been talking, should I say. But for me, the big takeaway is there is a desire outside of learning for people to use this. We must engage with it. We must embrace the fact that people are using more social, and I use the term social, I don't mean like social learning, I mean social mediums for communication. Teams and Slack, YouTube comments, blogs we've already talked about, but all these options are possible. I mean, years ago, things like WhatsApp didn't exist. The smartphone came along, and then suddenly the idea of connecting with people in a way that was much, much quicker and seamless, it's kind of unthinkable, particularly to our children or the younger generations who are used now to using Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp, that we ever communicated in ways other than via letter that we posted through into the post box and it arrived on someone's doorstep a few days later. That is a concept that is quite foreign to, frankly, an increasing amount of our population. I'm a millennial, so when smartphones came out, I was in my late teens, and the notion that I remember using MSN Messenger to communicate with my school friends. I would spend all day with them, come back and use MSN Messenger. So that was kind of the precursor to WhatsApp. But people want to collaborate. They want to talk to each other. This pandemic has shown us that people want to see each other on video. So let's embrace the need for people to have that human interaction. How can we add that back into the environment? I think I'm talking about this with teams, but then what about like the actual learning environment itself? Let's touch on a couple of points there. So let's say we've engaged with people with Teams and Slack. We've marketed content to them. We've engaged them in a learning capacity. What can we do on platform? Well, we've talked about self-authoring, and I don't want to go labour on that point, but there's lots of options on platform. A lot of platforms now have the ability to rate content. Why is that important? Well, the rating of content is a way by which a social measure, such as thumbs up or a 5-star rating system, provides a degree of confirmation that content is relevant or is of good quality. Take that one step further. Allow access to people to provide comments. Now that's sometimes a scary prospect, because often throughout my day job I get people saying, well, what happens if we get comments that we don't want anymore? Most systems let you remove those or monitor those, particularly when you're using the other tools in the system like forums, blogs and things like that, and wikis. But we're also in a situation where we have to, I'm of the opinion we have to treat people like adults. If I'm in my place of work and I'm posting up content or comments that are unwarranted, unfair, or inflammatory, there's a couple of things. First of all, they need to be taken down if they are causing offence, obviously. We have that responsibility as an extension of HR to do that. But if there's if they're not causing offence and they're an opinion, is that something that's not often warranted as a different point of view? Maybe that person didn't quite understand what was being spoken about that topic, and shouldn't we provide the opportunity to our peers and to those that have gone through that training content or created it to come back with a rebuttal and have that conversation. Because if one person's thinking it and commenting on it, how many other people have done the same? I just post that out there, and I know that's hard for L&D functions to do, but sometimes I think these systems can feel too controlled, too manicured to show only the good. I jump on when I was a strategic consultant, I used to jump onto people's LMSs, and I would look at them and the content that's been rated, and I would say the vast majority was 5-star, 4-star and above. That doesn't then provide a reference. And I know why that happened is because people weren't engaged in that process. They didn't feel like their vote actually counted for anything. So the newer content wouldn't get votes anymore. Started off great, star, loving this content, loving the new approach, and then it dwindled. And some of that was down to L&D engagement, but a lot of that was down to the fact that the audience was disenfranchised and felt like if I vote this, it has no real relevance to my peers. It doesn't get searched on. It doesn't get included. The instructional designers aren't looking at this and taking the feedback on board. So the biggest thing you can do if you're going to implement these social measures is to actually make sure that the feedback you get, you implement. Feedback loop, that's what it is. Phil's asked a question in the chat there. Is it important to have a member of staff whose job is to encourage social learning? 100%, I would say so. I would definitely agree that's doable, but as to Laura's point, what does good look like? There's a definition. I've spoken about this at length about the resource that we have inside L&D. In fact, I came off a call on Friday having this discussion with someone in their organisation. In fact, I can say that we are getting that individual on stream, not this Thursday, but next Thursday. More information to come out about that, but that's going to be an interesting conversation. They're using some of the things that I talk about with other individuals within the industry. But for me, I would be encouraging the use of people's skill sets outside of L&D, like social media managers, people who have got used to, in say a marketing space, engaging in a social context with people. Working out, well, here's an opportunity that we can drive some traffic to the website. View it as a marketing campaign. Think about the flow. I say we have Teams, we have Slack. Have a channel in there. We're posting out content. That's marketing. We're marketing a piece of content that's just been created. Then they get to site where they can see other content that's coming up, whether you've got recommended feeds, whether you've got a banner at the top of the homepage for that individual showing content that's relevant to them, or the latest content that's just been released, or if there's an initiative like Women in Work Week, something like that, where you can hero the content of the moment. If you aren't using Teams or Slack, or if you're wanting to use blogs and wikis on platform, which is an option because it's a good way of containing learning content to the learning platform or learning discussion to the platform, then using those and marketing those or having someone monitor those is 100% useful. But what good looks like will depend upon your organization, what you want to achieve, what the makeup of your social construction of your organization is like. That's what I would believe. But Phil, please elaborate. If you can think about what good social learning to look like, then please post it into the comments. As I say to everybody else, please do the same. Where was I before I took that slight little segue from what I was talking about? Oh yeah, well, we're kind of on the topic, to be fair, of building things into the platform, how I build it out. So I would use social learning as a way to move people from Teams and Slack. I also would look at use social as a genuine engagement strategy. I would be looking at encouraging ways for people to... I would be trying to build discrete audiences within my larger learning audience where we encourage social learning. So let me think about this from perspective of the learner today. They go onto a platform, and do they want to engage with social tools? Maybe, maybe not. And I think the maybe not comes from the fact that historically learning's been pretty poor at doing that. They've been pretty poor at implementing those options, and people typically at the moment, or at least as well, sorry, I need to clarify this. I think people are definitely wanting to do more with the learning platforms they're provided with, that the data bears that out. There's a Fosway report that comes out every year. Last year, I think it was in November, October. I can dig that out and share it. I don't think Fosway will mind me doing that. I'll point to their site where you can download it. But social learning or learning digitally is always on the agenda of what people want to do. So I don't think there's any doubt there that people want to do more. So we know that people want to do more, but we don't, as an L&D function, necessarily provide them the opportunity to do more. And so I would think you've got to start with some baby steps, because sticking a blog on, sticking activity feeds, stacking the ability to maybe rate, comment if you haven't already done so on content, that's going to overwhelm people. I would start with the process of how do I start to pull people around the idea of contributing beyond just going on and consuming a video or looking at an infographic. And the way that I would do that initially probably is through channeling people through things like Teams and Slack to get the idea that there's more than one avenue to get to the content. And then also by looking at creating discrete groups on the platform. What I mean by that is think about the parallels, or think about the way that we were doing training before this crisis hit. A lot of it blended, but there's still a reliance on face-to-face for a lot of training, particularly things like soft skills and things like that. So those types of training, those face-to-face environments, you're a cohort, you come together and you learn. And a lot of that is about the social aspect. You're not sat in your room completing an e-learning course. What you are is you're in room engaging with 20 or 30 other individuals around a topic area that is that's relevant to all of you, and sharing best practice. That's the best thing that I've ever felt when delivering training came out of those face-to-face environments, was the fact that we can connect on a social level, individual or group-wise. So let's take that and think about a cohort and pull that online. So inside of a course that people are maybe doing, let's take a leadership course. It's moved digital. Maybe inside that, in that specific cohort of learners that might be 20 or 30 people of your leadership community involved in that piece of training content, you provide them a forum or at least a means by which they can share best practice. Now that might be in Teams, but it might be that you decide to do that on the learning platform, because what you're wanting to do is instill the idea that you're going to, share best practice, but that forum then might become available so that others moving up to then into a more senior leadership role might benefit from the conversations that have taken place previously in that cohort. Sharing ways to deal with conflict, deal with the challenge that we're facing right now, for example. Those conversations that people have are worthwhile keeping, and having on the learning platform means that you can search for them and index them and understand what the activity is across those tools. And that would be the way I'd start to bleed in the use of social, potentially. One option. There's lots of others, but I would pick one and I would go with it, and I would champion it, hero it, and really push home that you're wanting to encourage that way of people collaborating. And then in 3 months, let's say down the line, when you've got a decent degree of engagement on the medium that you choose, add in another. So if we've gone down the route of using, forums or wikis for cohorts, maybe then the time is to say, right, we would appreciate your engagement as a learner community on the piece of content. We've enabled that, a commenting feed on our content. We'd appreciate if you give us feedback and use that as a feedback mechanism back to L&D, and a way for your instructional designers potentially to engage more directly with the learners that they're actually pushing the content to. These are the kind of things that I would be thinking about, baby steps, but things that you can turn on and focus on and really drive behaviour. And before you know it, you'd be amazed at how much activity you have across the site without people people necessarily realizing it. And it would become habitual, because people will be going, well, I'm going to make a comment on this because I don't agree with this slide. I'm going to stick it in the comments. Or I'm going to take this conversation and put it into a forum because this is something I want to continue the discussion. Make it part of your instructional design. Set up a forum post, or set up a forum thread, should I say, that poses a question, and get those people to jump onto that and answer it. Make it even a goal within the learning path that they're going through, that they have to go on and make a contribution to that specific forum post. Loads of options to kind of force or encourage the idea of social collaboration. I see Laura's put a couple of comments there. So let's have a quick look. Agree. Also important to think about shifting social engagement with content, conversation to social application of learning, reflecting and working out loud. Completely agree. Tom, have you seen social platforms being used to help people apply and reflect on application as part of the learning process? 100% yes. I have seen that where actually I've mentioned this example before where people were using video content, self-authored, to push it up there. But what was then happening was that people were commenting on that video content. So an engineer would go out, film themselves doing a job. It would come back, and then someone would pose a question, well, what? And they would be something along the lines of, like, that's really interesting. Have you ever come across this? And then that individual would come back either with another video response or a comment based upon that question. So it's not that even the initial training actually provided the answer. What it did was help promote the conversation on that topic area. And so it's the spark. It's that conversation between engineers, potentially on different sides of the country or even the planet, that are sharing their thoughts and views on something, and for the other engineering community to see. Hugely beneficial. Hugely beneficial. The final thing I'm probably going to touch on, and I did want to touch before, kind of close this down a bit earlier so that people can do their silence at 11 o'clock. But please feel free to post more comments in the chat. The big thing for me is you've got to pick a medium, and move forward with it and really commit to it, and think about ways you're going to weave it in, and make sure it's set in, I say in stone, but it has real good traction before you necessarily engage on another. It has to be baby steps, but people are wanting this. The data I showed previously on the slides here bears that out. I think from the thing that always I come back to is, and I talk about behavior a lot, and I talk about shifting behaviors, mindsets, and creating habits, and I stand by that. But one of the things that really does help with that is giving people a compelling reason to come to platform. That is more nuanced than just saying we're providing social features today. It's to do with the relevancy of the content, how often it's updated, how well you're targeting that content at the audiences you have, with recommendations and things like that. But fundamentally, if you provide people a compelling reason to come to the platform, and probably more importantly, return to the platform, then you will see your engagement levels rise rapidly. And I think if there's one tool in the arsenal of retaining engagement, it's social, because it's something that provides your platform that dynamic quality on a daily basis, hourly basis, even minutely basis, if you can engage that audience in that way. I've seen applications where social learning, even if it's just a case of commenting and sharing how good, or a success story as a result of going through a piece of training content, those kind of things, I've seen them work. I've seen them resonate in organizations, and I've seen them build advocacy for the work that L&D do. And L&D aren't even doing it, as in the advocacy. They're letting their audience champion the great work that L&D is doing. And to me, that's where social media or social learning is so great. I'd encourage everyone to think about that. What's the compelling reason for people to come back to platform? And if I don't have one, can I create one? Can I nurture one? I suppose that's probably a good place to leave this stream, unless there are any other questions in the chat. I did notice that Phil responded. I didn't touch on that. So I think good social learning involves more digital discussions about things important to the organisation. I agree. I think that's true. But I think that's part of it, because social for a lot of people isn't even necessarily making a comment. It can be putting a like on a video, or sharing the fact that they have achieved something in their activity feed. We haven't touched on gamification, but I mean that's part of the social process, because it's social advocacy or a willingness to publicize how well you're doing in a specific area. But for me, as I said, it all comes back to the compelling reason as to why someone comes to the platform. I think social is a big part of it, that sense of community. Any other questions? in the chat. I appreciate we're ending a bit earlier today, but not every stream has to be an hour. It's sometimes hard to talk for that length of time, and but I think today we've covered a fair amount on social, and would happily carry on the conversation, as I know a couple of you have done. A number of you have done since the streams have started. We've had a huge amount of engagement outside of stream in terms of chat and continued discussion. So feel free to do that. Any other updates? I think housekeeping wise, we have a stream this Thursday, and I don't know if the agenda's set for that. I must check our stream agenda. But I also know that next week I've double booked the Thursday, so I need to move one of them. But one stream coming up is about kind of like the future technology that we're using within that can be used within learning, focusing on AI and statistical analysis, maybe some stuff around I've just gone blank. What's it called? Predictive analytics and things of that nature. So we're pulling in someone for that, and we, as I said before, we have a stream next Thursday where we have a learning organisation, a content provider who work in the in this situation in the sales space, working with another organisation. So what we have is a content provider and their customer coming on stream to talk about the way that the COVID crisis hit them in the middle of designing a major program of learning, and how they've had to adapt on the fly. So something that would be, I think, really interesting to a lot of people that come on the stream. But thank you very much. Please like,